Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Jake's Take with Jacob Elyachar Podcast. I'm your host, Jacob Elyachar, the chief content producer and writer of jakestake.com, a pop culture entertainment news website. Now, if you're listening to this on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, Spreaker, Deezer, Podcast Addict, give us a 5-star review and please subscribe. If you're watching us on YouTube, please hit the like button and please also hit subscribe. Alrighty, my next guest is an award-winning musician. He has received over 24 awards for Best New Song and Video Awards across various international music film festivals. And as of this recording, his music has been streamed over 3.6 million times on Spotify. And he's toured across Australia, Europe, New Zealand, and the United Kingdom. So please help me welcome Eden James.
Hi, Jake. How are you?
I'm doing good. You didn't expect that intro, did you?
No, and I really liked it because I felt like I was on a talk show, and so I felt I needed to do the jog out and greet my host.
Excellent. Maybe a talk show maybe would be in the future, but however, I'll stick with podcasting. But thank you so much for taking time out of your schedule to talk with me today. I really appreciate it.
Oh, I'm happy to be here.
All right, so let's get started. So when did you get interested in music, and how did that passion evolve into the desire to pursue a career in the music industry?
Probably started before I was 8 years old. My mother is a piano player, and we had a piano in the living room. And but what really, I think the pivotal moment was when I was 8. I started drum lessons, and my drum teacher told me that Paul McCartney made £1 per minute from his songwriting royalties, or something like that, whether it was £1 per second or minute or whatever. And I thought, wow. Okay, that sounds like something that I'd love to do. So just like when I was 8 years old, my 8-year-old brain thought, I'm going to be a songwriter. And I think I just was never able to shake that. But I think naturally my music, like I was drawn to music in a very deep and strong way. So it was always my passion. And so I knew I was going to be a songwriter, and I started writing at a very early age, and just have never looked back. And it's really a blessing to be where I am.
I think that I agree completely. I think I have to say with Paul McCartney, the pound per minute, I think it's now doubled or quadrupled, like with inflation at 10 pounds per second.
Yeah. Well, yeah, like I'm not talking about his time that he puts in. Like if you say you're a lawyer and you make $250 an hour or whatever, like it's like every second, every minute of the day for the last 50 years or whatever. That's how it accrues. But you're probably right. It probably has, like when I was 8 years old, that's a long time ago. So I'm sure in the last few decades, it has quadrupled.
Awesome. Speaking of Beatles, did you see that Paul McCartney, Rick Rubin documentary on Hulu?
No.
It's very fascinating. After this podcast, you should, or if you have a chance this week, go check it out. It's fabulous.
Oh yeah, I will. That's a good pairing. Cool.
It is. All right. So speaking of music heroes, who are they and how do they inspire your sound?
One of my early heroes was Billy Joel. I listened to his whole collection at when I was a teenager, and he had quite a large catalog. And we used to go on road trips with my family, and I'd listen to Billy Joel on my Walkman in the back seat of the car, and I'd go to sleep like listening to Billy Joel. And I think that gave me a great sense of melody writing and storytelling in general. But I think Billy's got a great talent right across the board in music, but his melodies are amazingly memorable. And I think that really gave me a great step up to not just melody writing, but also pop song structure. There's something that I do when I'm writing is I really look out for those magic moments, and because I think every line and every lyric and every interval of the music needs to be a magic moment. So until you feel that there's some kind of magic happening, pursue it and keep going. You're not there yet. And I think Billy Joel was one of these writers who really knew how to bring out that magic in writing.
I agree completely. Have you ever seen Billy Joel live?
Yes. Yes, I've several times. And there was one time I saw him with Elton John together. Two of them played together.
Is that the face-to-face tour?
Probably. It's probably called something like that. Yeah.
I would have given my everything for to see the face-to-face tour. But however, I did see them separately. Both of them are one. I saw Billy Joel when he was in Kansas City. He's one of my all-time favorites. And my go-to karaoke song is "We Didn't Start the Fire." So when I heard that guitar riff, I went out of my seat and jumped out of my chair so badly when I was with my family.
Yeah, and what a great entertainer he is as well. Not just songwriter and in the studio and all that, but on stage as an entertainer. Wow, wowee!
I'm just so grateful I got to see him before the pandemic.
Yeah.
So speaking of the before the pandemic, so you toured across the globe, your your home country of Australia, France, Greece, Japan, Norway, Poland, and UK. So what were some of your highlights traveling the globe?
I particularly remember some tours in Norway, which I just have a very fond memory of touring in Norway. And that came about from a friend I met at university in Australia, Teddy Damon. I'll actually give a shout out to Teddy Damon. He put this together, the tour in Norway. That he's from Norway. And he arranged for a limo driver to pick me up and take me to every gig. And like I was just being limoed around. And he was just the best tour manager. And I don't know, there was something about, I'd never been to, well, actually, I had been to Norway before. This was not my first time, but it was just a really well-run tour. And I've got Teddy Damon to thank for that. That was a lot of fun. I don't know. There was something very memorable about that. Oh, I do remember going out after the shows. It was like 10 p.m. after my show. And then we'd go out and it's still light. Like this was in the summer in Norway, right? So you still have the light is still up and it feels like late or like, late afternoon. And I thought, this is just crazy. This is amazing. So that was a very special time. And Japan as well was another mind-blowing experience. I've been there a couple times on tour and the fans are so enthusiastic and they really take their role of fan to a new level. Just with the photographs and fun and yeah, they were just amazing. The fans in Japan, probably the best. I'm sure I'm allowed to say that.
I gotta say, I would love to visit Norway and Japan. And I remember like what you're telling me about Japan, and like I remember seeing these old stuff with Michael Jackson whenever he was during the bad era, and seeing how that the entire country literally showed up to see him. And then I'm thinking about Lady Gaga and One Direction when they were in their heyday, in their heights of their superstardom. Like I definitely said that with the Japanese fans are a very special group of fans that are so dedicated no matter what happens.
Yeah, very dedicated, and just really, really wonderful people.
I definitely would love to go and travel to Japan and visit Tokyo.
You should, as soon as you get some like time to travel and the go ahead, the green light. Definitely, Japan is a wonderful place, and I would like to go back, and this time instead of the cities, but I'd like to explore some of the countryside and visit some onsens and the mountains and small little seaside villages. Those kind of things are what I'm looking for the next time I go.
I totally agree, because Tokyo is basically like New York, the Western version of New York.
Yeah, it's a big city and it's amazing. You should definitely see it, but I think the more interesting and cultural aspects lie outside the bigger cities.
All righty, I totally agree. So speaking of fans, we got to go talk about how did the COVID-19 pandemic challenge you as a performer to remain connected with your fans?
So I think this is probably an unusual take on the pandemic and the music industry. or how it affects musicians and artists. But I really noticed that the pandemic helped people connect with their fans online and all across the world, or even make new fans, because artists were now forced to stay home. They were forced to do all their social engagement online. And, not just artists, but everyone was in the same boat. So what I found that I could do is I could spend more time honing those skills of cultivating the online audience. And you have more time to do webinars and education and learning things about how to grow your audience and things like this. Like Spotify have a big section on this, on how to grow your audience as a musician and as a Spotify for artist. And I think the pandemic actually gave us that opportunity. It's like, okay, you've got all the time in the world now. Not exactly, but more than usual. And you're at home, we're glued to our screens. And this is where we had to become creative and more creative entrepreneurs. And we have to sort of, study these 101s on how to grow your audience on social media. And these are things that musicians are generally terrible at, and because usually they're off to practice, they're off to gigs, they're out doing the social thing. But when it comes to like the textbook maneuvers, they're not that good at sitting down and actually really nutting things out. They're more like the movers and the shakers. So I think the pandemic actually forced a lot of artists to educate themselves and sort of uptick themselves in how to reach and how to grow their audience. So I think that's a great thing. Yeah.
I totally agree, because the thing is, I love seeing the artists at their homes, no matter if they're living in a mansion like Sir Elton John or a mini or an apartment. It's still great to see them connect and say we're human. They're not just all gods that are promoted.
Yeah, that's actually a good point. There's this sort of every band's artist sort of aspect of them being at home with their with their pets and their guitars hanging on the wall and things like that. It's I never thought about that, but I can understand how fans would really enjoy that aspect of that experience, of that engagement.
I totally agree. One of my favorite moments was actually a Passover Seder that they had, an interactive Passover Seder, and they had Shoshana Bean and then Cynthia Erivo. Two of them have been Concord Broadway and are talented musicians. And they had Stephen Schwartz on Zoom piano, and they sang "When You Believe" from The Prince of Egypt. That was a moving moment during the pandemic.
Yeah. Do you remember last summer, or maybe I think it was summer, but so early on in the pandemic, all the Zooms, like the musician Zooms, were just starting to happen. The Rolling Stones, there was a benefit gig. I forgot what it was called, but Elton John was on it. The Rolling Stones were on it. Did you see that one? Did you remember that one?
I believe so. It was like with Christina Aguilera, a lot of major names.
Yeah, Lady Gaga was on there.
Yeah.
Clive were there. And all these artists were all doing like the Zoom performance, and a lot of it was just pre-recorded. Like Charlie Watts, rest his soul, was even just air drumming. That was what he was doing in the Rolling Stones. He was just playing on his furniture, although it was real drums that we could hear in the Zoom. So a lot of it was like, okay, we're not going to take this that seriously. We're just going to have some fun with it and do what we can. Because I know there is a big sync issue when you start to get different people, musicians all playing at once over Zoom. There's a lot of sync issues that happen, and timing issues. So often, and I think which happened in every single performance of this star-studded lineup, it was all pre-recorded, but it was made out to appear that it wasn't. Although I think Elton John's performance was probably live, because it was just him on the piano and in his back garden. So that seemed to be real.
Yeah, the thing is, because I could definitely tell you, if that happened, egos would hurt. I could see this right now if Mariah Carey got less time than Sir Elton John.
Oh yeah, those prima donnas, they love to have have an ego war.
Yeah, but here's the thing. I like them both. But speaking of notable musicians, I want to talk with you about All the Blanks Are Taken, because for this album, you had the opportunity to work with musicians and producers who worked with some rock royalty, like Billy Joel, Bruce Springsteen, David Bowie, Paul McCartney, and Tina Turner. So what were some of the lessons that you learned from them? And did they share any stories about their time with those rock icons?
Well, what did I learn from? So the takeaway for me was just an exercise in professionalism. That's really what it was. And I consider myself the utmost professional, but to see some of these high caliber, big name artists and working with them and producers, it certainly was an exercise in professionalism. Everybody had done their homework before they got into the studio, so no time was wasted. And with that said, there wasn't a lot of time to hang around and storytell. So I didn't really have a time. Like, I don't really remember a time where they name dropped and told me of stories about their big name artists. But everybody was so professional, and they really loved what they were doing. And I could see that they enjoyed working on my songs, which was just so flattering for me. And I would have them all back. Everyone who worked on that, I'd have them all back. They were so great, and I loved how the album ended up. So I would do it all again for the next one.
I'm glad to hear it, because they've had all these musicians that could have easily been like, hey, let's do this in spontaneity and everything and waste time. But like, I'm glad to hear that they did the homework and they had a great time working on this project, because this is a really good rock album. What a very strong rock album. I'm talking about all the guys. I'm talking about All the Good Blank Are Taken. That is Eden's latest album.
Thank you, Jake. Yeah, I'm really proud of it. Like, it's doing really well with the awards and the reviews. I'm so happy with all the great reviews that have been coming in. So thank you. I'm glad new people are coming to it, and I like finding new audiences, and I hope more people get to hear it.
All right, I got to talk to you about some of those songs and the stories behind them.
Yep.
When I listened to Something Called Love, that guitar riff reminded me so much of Start Me Up.
So it was a concerted effort to make it a Stonesy sounding song. The riff, I actually thought it was a little brown sugary, but now that you mentioned Start Me Up, it's probably more closer to the Start Me Up riff. But it was definitely a concerted effort to give it a sort of a Rolling Stones vibe. So that's how I came at that song. That song was written by myself and my good friend John Drake from the Dust Coda in the UK. And John, before John formed the Dust Coda, or before they formed as a band, he released a solo record. There's this little fly in here. He released this solo record, and he put Something Called Love, the song that we wrote together, on that. And so that came out in something like late 2009 or something. And then years later, I started playing that here in New York and with my band live. And then I thought, well, I want to put this on a record, but I want to do it differently. So I changed the style of it, and I thought it would fit really well doing this kind of Stonesy kind of vibe. So that's how the riff came about. It's like I knew what I wanted from it, and I said, okay, let me find a way to make this as Stonesy as possible, but still, putting my name and my brand on it.
I totally agree, because it would be flattered for Mick and Keith and Ronnie, but like, if you're Eden James.
Yeah, thank you.
Alrighty, so Stranger, I thought, was like a Lenny, was something a little bit of Lenny Kravitz swagger in it. So what's the story behind that song?
Well, that's interesting that you mentioned Lenny Kravitz. Is I haven't heard his name referenced to any of my stuff, not since the first album where I had a hit with Now or Never, which was very much like a Lenny Kravitz type guitar song. And then I really haven't revisited anything that Lenny did, but it's interesting to hear you say that. So obviously there's some Lenny Kravitz influences still sticking out of my music, because I used to like Lenny a really long time ago. I don't listen to much of his stuff these days, but I don't want to diminish it in any way. But Stranger actually came from Leonard Cohen, so another Lenny.
Really?
Leonard Cohen. I was listening to a lot of Leonard Cohen, and I liked the way Leonard Cohen was so playful in his seduction and his romantic tales, and he was very cheeky and but so smooth, and a lot of grit. And I thought I want to. This song I want it to come across from well, I want it to start from a position of like that, what Leonard Cohen does. So that's how that song came about. But it started out as a very bluesy acoustic song, and then as I took it in the studio, I tried to make it a little more like produced and bigger and more rock pop than sort of bluesy acoustic, which I feel we did nicely. So that's the tale of Stranger. That's the tale of two Lennys, I suppose.
That's awesome. When I see a song called New York, there's three songs that gravitate to me. There's Billy Joel and Barbra Streisand's duet of New York State of Mind that they did in 2014. There's, of course, New York, New York by the immortal Frank Sinatra. And then, of course, there's Empire State of Mind, which is Jay-Z and Alicia Keys. So how did you want to make sure that I know it's a new song. I know it's, even though they all have like the same similar title of New York in it, but how does that song, you make your version of New York?
The best answer for that is it started out as a different song, and I actually then put it a sort of a New York story and a tale, a New York cover on top of this. So this is a song that started out, again, this was actually another co-write that I did with John, and we wrote this in London when I was living in London, UK, and it had a different title, and it was called Dark Lanes. So melodically it was the same verse and chorus, and then I took my band to it in London, and we sort of did a rough version of it. And when I was putting together songs for this album, for All the Good Blank, I looked at this song and I said, I want to redo this, but I want to give it a whole new lyric on this song. And so because I was in New York, I thought, okay, I'm going to give this song a story about New York. And so that's what I did. So I think that's probably how I steered clear of any usual inspirations about songs of New York, is because it started out in London and then just came to New York, which is sort of a bit like my journey. And my experience of New York is, I've lived on 3 continents. I went from Australia to the UK, and from the UK I came to the US. So I've got a different perspective on not just America, but in New York as well, because like you bring your own culture or your past cultures wherever you go. And, I think that's probably how I've managed to give New York an Eden James stamp rather than some of those other artists that you just mentioned.
I agree. And I also love those backing vocalists, how the strong in their emphasis in New York. Those were fantastic.
Oh, thank you. I think that was a nod to some of those past artists that you were mentioning. There's a bit of Alicia Keys moment there, and certainly maybe even Billy Joel, I suppose. Oh no, it's Frank Sinatra is the New York track. It's hard to say and sing New York without having kind of some reference to those great lines. Even when we say the word New York, it almost sounds like it's Frank's melody of the song New York, New York. So
Frank's melody and Barbara's voice. All righty, so Bad Girl definitely had a little. I felt I heard a little Prince in that version of it. I could be wrong.
That's pretty cool. So you're bringing up artists that I really loved a long time ago. So I was a big Prince fan at one time, and I listened to him so much, but not so much anymore. And I certainly don't sort of look to bring out any Princeisms in my music. But that's interesting that you say that. I hear a little bit more of, and probably some Bowieisms in the chorus of that song. And maybe, where I think you might be hearing the Prince thing is in the post-chorus. Where it says, that ain't my, no, that ain't my woman. Okay. Which I also felt was a little Michael Jackson-y. So there we go. I think that's where that connection comes from. It's, yeah. All right. That makes a lot of sense.
All righty. Let's talk about Dangerous, rounding out with Dangerous Game. That's the story behind that one.
Dangerous Game was a story about an ex-girlfriend and probably actually a mix of some dating stories here in New York, where they just sort of turned out to be some quite unsavory types, you could put it.
I'm so sorry, Eden, like a dirty Diana?
Yeah, a little bit like that. Yeah, actually, that's a very good description. So Dangerous Game is a little bit about the pitfalls of falling for the dangerous type, the dirty Diana.
I love when we're talking about, like, with music. It's the thing is, if you're a music journalist, you have to have at least a couple of years behind it. So that's why I'm bringing in a lot of different references.
Yeah, well, that's excellent. When I was growing up, I think when I went to music college, the three greatest music artists in the world were Prince, Michael Jackson, and Madonna, and so I was listening to a lot of those guys, and that wasn't even in their prime. This was kind of like just post their prime, and they kept going. But so a lot of my pop sensibilities come from artists like that. But then I felt that I really moved away from pop and sort of focused on the rock and also the alternative and the indie side of rock, where I feel I'm very comfortable. And but even in those genres that I'm talking about, there's still, the best, what I would call the best of those genres have still a heavy hand or a heavy dose of pop song in it. Like even some of the most indie or alternative albums that we can think of are still very, very much pop albums. Things like Lou Reed's Transformer, and the Strokes. Like the Strokes' first album. These are great songs which you could probably strip down and perform in any style, and they'd still be great songs or great pop songs. So
I totally agree. I totally agree with that. And the thing is, I just read a tweet that said that Prince, Michael, and Madonna were the foundations of MTV, which is correct.
Yeah. I suppose they were the superstars of not just of their time, but I think they started this sort of like untouchable superstar, like the cream of the crop thing, that every decade there was a new handful of new superstars that sort of took that place,
like a Celine Dion, a Mariah Carey from the 1990s, and then Britney, and then NSYNC and Beyonce of the 2000s, and then of Gaga in the 2000s, and then Taylor Swift, and then Bruno Mars in 2010, and then now Billie Eilish of the 2010s.
Yeah, and honestly, I actually stopped listening to and stopped paying attention. I think I stopped paying attention to that kind of stuff because I'm not really interested in making outright pop music. So I'm not really interested in what's going on out there because otherwise you'll get distracted and misled. And I'm not saying that it doesn't have a valid place, but for personally, I tend to look at more more sort of underground musicians and I don't know, something that has music, trying to write music that has sort of more staying power and longevity associated to it, because pop music is a dangerous game, I suppose, if you're looking at making something that has staying power, because like the whole idea of pop is to appeal to the current trend, and that's really hard to make music that appeals to the current trend but also gets better or stays over time. But anyway, I'm going on a bit of a tangent, and I can talk about music for ages.
I know we could talk about music for ages, but however, we got to start winding down our conversation. So, who are your dream collaborators? The singers, the songwriters, the musicians, the producers, and how would they enhance your sound if you had the opportunity to work with them?
I really love what the National are doing. I think it's something that's it's quite unique, and it's quite now, but it still maintains this sort of level of alternative or indie style. So there's Matt Berninger from the National. I'd like to sing with him or even co-write. Who I just hadn't thought of. Ron, what's his now? What's his name? Ron Gallo. Have you heard of Ron Gallo?
I have not had the opportunity to hear of Ron Gallo.
Well, I'm glad I brought him up, because you'll check him out, because as a music fan, I think you'll really enjoy it. Ron Gallo is just doing amazing things as a rock indie artist, but a hybrid. Like, he's sort of like, I think he's a bit like the new Beck, because he actually steps across a lot of musical lines. Like, from one album, from album to album, they're completely different. And even on each album, he does sort of stray from the path of what, like, songs of genres. So incredibly talented, but each song that he does is it's clever. It's credible. It's just really great. Like, check him out. Ron Gallo is, yeah. So I'd like to do something with him, whether we produce or co-write. And also the singer from Razorlight. Do you know a band from England called Razorlight?
I have not had the opportunity to listen to Razorlight, but I will check them out.
Yeah. So the singer Johnny Borrell, they've been around for a couple decades now, and I just really like to work with Johnny Borrell. I think we'd click in a very interesting way. Like, I was listening to some Spotify today, and Razorlight came on, and then one of my songs came on after it, and I was listening to the production and the sound, and I thought, wow, this is actually really, really similar in not just production sound, but genre, and in so many ways. So I thought that's what gave me the idea. I thought, oh, maybe I could work with Johnny Borrell. It would be pretty cool.
Awesome. So one of my second to last questions is, if you had the opportunity to meet with international musicians who are trying to break into the music industry, what advice would you share with them?
Ask questions. Ask many questions, because it's so important, and it can save you so much energy, resources, time, and money. And save you from making some big mistakes if you ask the right questions. Do your homework beforehand. With every opportunity that you have, do your homework, and ask the right questions, because if you don't, and this happened to me many times. You get disappointed. You realize it's not a good match for you, or it's something that's not working out. Maybe it's a producer or a manager or a booking agent or a sync agent. Who knows? But if you don't ask the right questions at the beginning, they'll reveal themselves later on, and it may be disappointing, and you might work out that things aren't going as you planned. So that's my best advice, I think, is ask a lot of questions and do your homework before every opportunity.
Awesome. So my last question, ready?
Mm-hmm.
Where can my audience find your music and also follow you on social media?
My website, edenjames.com, has the links to all my socials. So you can find me on Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook, TikTok. But if you go to edenjames.com, you can find the links there, and also on my Linktree, which is a little more concise and has all the latest info on my Linktree, which is linktr.ee/EdenJamesMusic.
Awesome. So, guys, if you miss an episode of the Jake's Take with Jacob Elyachar podcast, head to Apple Podcasts, Deezer, Google Podcasts, Spotify, and Spreaker. Just type in Jake's Take with Jacob Elyachar, JACOBELYACHAR. Are you on social media? Because I'm on social media too. Head to Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and YouTube. Jacob Elyachar, JACOBELYACHAR. Now, Eden, just to let you know, it's Jake's Take's 10th anniversary this year.
Well done. Congratulations. That's amazing.
Thank you so much. So if you want to see more articles, more interviews, and more music reviews, head to jakes-take.com. Once again, jakes-take.com. Now, if you're financially able to, please consider heading to PayPal to help keep jakes-take.com and my platform up and running. I'm actually the one to schedule interviews with Eden, to write all the questions, to do all the editing. So it's just me. And if you're financially able to, great. I really appreciate it. But if you're not, please consider following me on social media and also subscribing to the podcast. It will help out tremendously. Eden, I had such an incredible time talking with you today.
Well, thanks for having me on, Jake. It was a pleasure to chat with you.
All right, guys. Thank you so much for taking time out of your schedules to watch and to listen to this. And have a fantastic one. Until next time, have a great one, everybody. Bye.